Good evening and welcome to the Jinn and Tonic Show on Friday, the 22nd of September, 2017. A warm welcome to everybody who's watching. This evening's show, we will be chatting, initially at least, about Islam and the secondary text, the sunnah. And stop spamming my illustrious fellow panelist and very knowledgeable gentleman. We'll be sharing some of that. We'll obviously be discussing it. If you are interested in joining us for the discussion, please let me know. You need to join me on Facebook and I can send you the link. So good evening, Stops. Welcome. How are you, sir?
Hi, welcome. What is illustrious?
Illustrious, meaning you have a long history of looking into Islam and you have a fair amount of knowledge. By the way, just as a side note, one of the comments earlier before we started here from our good friend TDS Dave, I thought, because you obviously would take TDS Dave some of his thoughts quite seriously. I think Stop's new street epistemology interest has ruined him. There was a time where you could let him out and he'd savage the brainless. Now he just wants to know what makes them so sure. Just kidding.
I'm sorry.
I thought that would be amusing there. So just apologies to Stops as well. He's just coming off a little bit of a cold. So you might hear him cough every now and again, but I did think that was a good.
Just give me a 2-second warning before you do. Okay, I'm going to hover my mouse over the microphone so the next time I can just speak it. Oh, but it was too quick there.
Cool.
Don't you know that atheism has been refuted by science? Exactly. Yeah, this was amazing. This was such.
Yeah, please do share with us some information.
Wow. No, I don't want to go over this again. I mean, go and watch the video. We'll
come back to that later. We'll come back to that later.
Now, one thing I do want to say though, atheist, okay? I used to do this in the beginning. I always used to do this introduction where I gave a definition. It was always amazing to me that even though I did this for many, many years, every single time, every single show, I gave a definition of atheist and why atheism is actually a stupid word, a non-existent term. I don't know, people were calling into the Jinn and Tonic Show and still saying an atheist is somebody who claims that there is no God. And I thought to myself, why am I doing this? Why am I, for 5 years, telling people an atheist is not somebody who makes a claim? An atheist is simply somebody who's a theist, a non-theist, somebody who does not believe what the theist believes. And there are then the different variances of that, the different strengths and weaknesses and all the things associated with that on top of that is then a matter of I don't know, character and personality, but it has nothing to do with the word atheist. The atheist is simply, I don't believe what you say, what you're telling me, mate. That's it. And that's it. And this is why there can be no ism. There's no goal, there's no doctrine, there's no dogma, there's no nothing. There is no ism. It's just that I think we're being too kind towards theists, that we're trying to speak their language, and I hate it. I don't agree. Okay, that's just my little bit.
No problem.
I want to talk about today is Islamic texts.
Just before you do that, though, let's do the crazy comments. It's always good to
sure.
Sorry, entertainment and education from our crazy comments. So we only have a few, so bear with us. I'm just going to add that so we can see it here. So here's a few of our crazy comments. I think the first few are the ones that I've picked up, and then Stops has sent me a few as well. So here's a gentleman. Now, this one, let's just read it first. We know what happens to atheists when even basic science is discussed with them. They get lost and come up with the usual argument that science is not absolute. We don't know everything and such. And how do you know that most atheists are more versed than theists? Just take an example and all of Shabir's videos. So it's kind of a bit of a muddled up comment, but essentially, if I understand it correctly, this person seems to think that atheists get all muddled up, and we are not the ones who say that science is not absolute. That's a qualifier when a theist says, oh, but it could be, it's not absolute, is it? I mean, I've never heard an atheist go, oh, it's not absolute. We just don't think in those terms. We don't think in absolute terms. So it's only a qualifier when a theist wants to jump in to try and say, oh, science isn't absolute, is it?
It's a sign of weakness,
And so, well, I would suggest that most atheists, well, when you say most atheists, those people that have studied, and there's more atheists, I think, that have studied things that are scientists than are not. Certainly, if you look at the American Academy of Sciences, about 97%, give or take, are atheists. So, and that may not represent the entire world, but there's a a body where there's a great number of varying scientists in many different fields. And so I would suggest that there are more atheists that are more well versed in science, generally speaking, than theists, because obviously theists will cherry pick science and reject it when they don't want it. So science is not their friend, except when they fancy it. But to take a look at all of Shabir's videos, now I'm not sure Shabir, to be honest, is a great example of somebody who's well versed in science. But there we go. Obviously, this person thinks so.
Yeah, look how many people say, if you want to know something about evolution, go to Sabur. He's totally lost. I mean, Sabur knows nothing about science, knows nothing about evolution. It's just that he's learned a couple of quotes, and that's it. And I don't understand why why Muslims especially say, oh yeah, he's the expert in evolution. Like it used to be with sources. He's the expert in embryology. He was just talking shit. And that's it. And afterwards he admitted it, but people still thought that, yeah, he really knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, I think a lot of Muslims, I've thought about this recently, a lot of Muslims it's like they're being hypnotized.
Exactly.
They're being hypnotized because they hear a few fancy words. The person sounds like they're intelligent. They quote a few people. They say a few things. No Muslim's really going to look at it and they go, wow, this guy knows a lot because he's used a few fancy words. I mean, you can all look this up. I'm not saying he's a complete idiot, but at the same time, you can use these words. You can cherry pick certain things. I'm in a group which you've joined as well, and there's one or two guys then that are sort of studying that sort of thing, and really it's cherry picking of the highest order. When you start to dig into it, you'll find that it's nothing like it's cracked up to be, but it sounds good when you're in speaker's corner or you're just throwing out a few terms. And so a lot of Muslims are being hypnotized by, Sabur being the evolutionary expert because he can quote a few things and he's read a few books. Great.
Well, I'm saying he's a complete
speak to somebody like Jerry Coyne or P.Z. Myers or any of these people, and then we'll see who knows what.
Yeah. And that's why I do call him and I call sources complete idiots. Really, they are. Because the same as I saw now hijab. Oh, yeah, he's really studied philosophy. No, he hasn't. He's just learned a couple of terms. And he's learned a couple of things. But as soon as you go one step down, one step deeper, he's lost. Like I remember with Phil, because Phil happened to know this. And he said, no, hang on, that's not what Plato said. Actually, he says the opposite. Oh, yeah, okay, well, there, but now here, there, now I know much better where this. No, he doesn't know. He's just bullshitting.
All right, next one. Let me make that a bit bigger. Where this fella came from, doesn't like me. I really think Rob is an awful out of shape, bold son of a bitch. Rob, if I ever visit Hyde Park, I would spit in your face. You're really annoying, man. Well, I hope you don't do that. I'm not a pacifist. I'm not somebody that will in any way engage in violence as a first thought, but certainly in defense, I'm not going to stand there and be a pacifist. So I would certainly not recommend you do that because I could always return the favor, but I certainly won't stand there with a smile on my face. So again, somebody that hasn't got an argument but finds it, hey, I find lots of people annoying, but I'm not going to go and spit in their face. But hey, you know what? Everybody to their own. That's one thing I do claim. And maybe I'm a little bit condescending, I don't know, but I do claim the psychological high ground. I'm not an intellectual. I'm not an expert like you are. I haven't studied the Quran and those sort of things, but I have had an education in certain psychological training. And that's where I do have, in my opinion, some superiority over most people in that regard. And so again, it's very unlikely that I'm going to get bent out of shape, but anybody can be pushed, and certainly if you're going to engage in physical violence, then I'm not going to stand around and just smile at you. But I don't get too many of these comments, but every now and again there's one or two that seem to find me annoying. Hey.
I like the bold son of a bitch.
Yes, bold. Oh, bold, yes, rather than bald. Yes. Cool. Next one. Well, I just picked this up recently. Again, obviously, Answer gets a few comments. Why is this featherweight talking to Shabir? He's getting folded, bent back, flipped, and ironed, then put aside. Shabir has a far more superior intellect by degree and experience. So this was a comment, obviously, when on the video where I got half of the conversation between Answer and Shabir. I think Content Over Everything got the full one, but we came a bit late to that. So somebody thinks that Answer is a featherweight and he's getting folded all over the show. Everybody's entitled to their delusions.
Intellect by degree, really
Sorry?
wonderful. An intellect by degree, excellent.
I don't know what degree, if he has one, that should be supposed to have. Maybe again, he just sounds like it, so people get hypnotized. He sounds like a smooth talker, and so I don't know for sure. He may well have a degree. I'd be interested to know if so, what degree it is. I know he apparently used to work in an area of the law field. And I actually used to work in IT in a big law firm, and so I understand the different departments. So again, I wouldn't be easily hoodwinked by somebody. I'd ask them, what law degree have they got, or where did they work in law, and then I'd quickly find out, to what degree they know what they're talking about, because law is a very multifaceted area. And having worked in a big law firm, I saw all the lawyers in different forms, and so they're not all the same. And I'd be interested if, in fact, he has got some kind of degree, what that is, but I'm not aware. Cool. And one from you that you sent over here. Oh, somebody for you. Aren't you lucky? So, go to hell, you kafir. I know who you are. Why you even watch Muslim videos? Fuck you and your mother, the whore. Stop spamming. Go fuck yourself, you Satan worshipper. I know who you are. You will burn in hell forever, and I love it. I will see you burn. Allah willing. Allahu Akbar. So you obviously incurred the wrath of somebody. What was that for?
I don't know. This happens when you sort of.
Was it?
No, this is
was
when
it on a video of yours, or was you commenting and they commented on your comment on some other video?
No, this is when they see I am taking their hero apart. When this, I can't remember if this was hijab or this Redbeard guy. I think this was the Redbeard, this Hamza guy.
But was this on one of your channels then? Was it?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, so again, somebody with a rather low intellectual / psychological level. It's all about how you're going to burn in hell. Well, everybody's entitled to their delusions. I mean, I'm as certain that there's no hell exists as is I'm philosophically justified, which is 99.9% reoccurring. That's how certain I am that a hell does not exist. I'm less certain that a God of some kind doesn't exist, but a hell, I'm very, very certain that a hell does not exist. To the point that I'm.
Yeah, but look at the inconsistency. If I'm a Satan worshipper, a Satan worshipper, then this would be hell, burning in hell. For what would that be? It would be a reward.
You will burn. Why is that?
Well, if I'm a Satan worshipper, of course it would be.
Well, presumably they think that Satan wouldn't treat you very well. But if you worship Satan, and in fact he did exist, then maybe he would treat you nicely. Who knows?
Exactly. So this is exactly what I'm saying. If you are a Satan worshipper, hell for you is a reward, just as going to heaven is a reward for those who worship the bad guy, the God guy.
Yes, exactly.
And this is quite funny for me. Why people think that God is good and why should Satan be bad? I think it should be the other way around. I would much rather go to hell and sit with the interesting people than with the goody two-shoes people hanging out on a cloud strumming the harp or something.
Yes, I've always thought that God is either evil or is a malicious joker. That's just as likely, if not more likely, than the supposedly all good God, which I think is contradictory anyway. So
Nabil died?
Yes. Oh, did you not hear that? Yeah,
no.
He passed away last week or whenever it was. So again, thoughts to his family. I know he was a Christian. Obviously, we don't agree with Christians either. But to whatever degree, he seemed like a nice gentleman from some of the videos I've seen and many of the comments that I've read about him.
But
you
how?
obviously know of him as well. Cancer. He was 34. I'm not sure what the cancer was. Again, I'm sure somebody would say.
Oh, shit.
But
my goodness, he was praying to two gods and none of them could do anything for him.
I wonder if he did actually pray to God about that, or he just accepted his fate. Who knows?
Wow.
But
why is God evil? God is evil. God is an evil asshole. Yes, and how many times do we have to go through that? Why God is bad?
God is evil. Yeah, we have talked about that before. Well, because he's immoral and irrational.
Yes.
As we've talked about before. We supposedly have free will, and yet he gives us commands. And there's consequence for the commands. If you, in fact, do have free will, then in order to choose freely, you shouldn't have a consequence, because otherwise you're under duress. You are making a choice under duress, which of course all theists, if they do believe that, are doing anyway. But then you're not a unconditionally loving God. But we
and
won't
then
go
of
into
course
that.
you have the logical argument where this God, I mean, he's incompetent. He creates people to worship him, which they don't, and then because he knows that they don't, but still creates them, punishes them for his own incompetence. That's not nice.
Yeah, but stops you forgetting, of course, that we have free will. So that negates all of that.
No. I'm saying that if somebody creates me knowing full well that I am not going to worship them, then this someone is creating that person or whatever who is not going to worship them, knowing full well that he's going to punish them, creating them to punish them. So this is the logical consequence. This God creates people in order to punish them for his own incompetence. And this is why it's bad.
Well, I can't argue with that. Of course, the theists will argue that we've got free will, but that's a contradiction, as you and I know.
Well, there's no free will in this.
Well,
You can't insert free will into this anyway. There's no wiggle room here. This is exactly the point, because if the God knows full well what you are going to do, there's no free will that can change that. So there's no way that you can insert that.
No, well, you and I and
Rob and the other guy, you have completely misunderstood the concept of God. I know it's all our fault. I mean, God is an asshole, and it's my fault that God is an asshole. Why? Why, if God would want me to know what a God is, why doesn't this God tell me what a God is? Nobody has ever been able to tell me what a God is.
Amar, if you want to join us, feel free to come on here and correct us and show us how it's not a contradiction.
Okay, but I'll talk about that in the Islamic text.
We'll talk about that a bit later. Cool. Let's do one more of these. Last one. This was your one as well. Speakers Corner Analyze. Don't edit the videos, you son of a whore, and I will bring you all the proofs, and I will make you eat your shit like Pitbull, Mr. Channel Dog. Speakers Corner Analyze. Why are you quite... Ask me anything and I will close your dirty mouth more, as I did with the last comment I gave you. Well, aren't you being told, huh?
I don't know. I attract weird
bad English. You are being told there. Told off, if you can understand what he's saying. He's amusing. Come on, somebody with such bad English is trying to tell you off.
Mr. Channel Dog.
And there we go. So there's our entertainment.
Bring me the proofs.
It is fun. We've got to have a little bit of fun. Now, again, I'm the first to say not all Muslims make crazy comments, but there's always one or two who reliably do so. I'm sure there's atheists who do it as well. Obviously, we hear the Muslims making the crazy comments because that's the, the ideology that we are critiquing. So more likely than not, that's the sort of comments we're going to receive. But it is funny and interesting. So
and I see content of everything is here. Thank you, man, for the video that you put up with Adnan Rashid. I was on the floor. I was giggling hysterically. I think it was 60 points comment on this. This is such a funny video. How Adnan is like frothing at the mouth. He's so desperate, and poor Kalam is giving him the runaround. And every time he asks him a question, he answers it, and Adnan going to say, "Oh yeah, that's correct. That's great." And then he starts the next one. I was in stitches. This was so funny. That was great stuff. Thank you very much for the entertainment. It's a 2-hour-long thing, very long, but I don't even know if I should comment on this in a video, but it's a brilliant thing. Yeah, I mean, Kalam was brilliant. Really, I must admit, I was very, very impressed by Kalam. The way that he knew every answer, he knew the facts, he got the dates, he had the concept, he had the right sources, he had the quotes. Everything was just there. It was brilliant, really, really brilliant. And the way that he was mocking poor Adnan, I mean, this was really nice.
I've got to watch it. I did see a 2-hour, and I haven't got a chance to watch it. But stops somebody in the chat there. Hood Im is obviously got a different view. He said Adnan destroyed Kalam. So there you go. There's always a
Adnan destroyed Kalam?
Yes, there's always a contrarian out there.
How can by doing what? By peeing in his pants. I mean, Adnan, what was funny is he kept on saying, okay, I'm out of here, I'm out of here, because he couldn't answer. He couldn't do anything. So he just ran away. But he couldn't, he stayed there, because then Kalam told, what's his face, Ali Dawa. I mean, if there's anybody who's totally incompetent, it's Ali Dawa. So he could, and even Adnan says, shut up, you're making it worse, to poor Ali Dawa. And then he was left on his own, and then Adnan saw that Ali could really not do anything. So he had to come back, and then he came and started more of this. And Adnan really, I mean, he's not the sharpest knife in the block, really. And then he tried to say something, and then Kalam had both of them running around, and they both couldn't answer. I thought this was great. Okay. I don't debate the Sikh guy. No, I didn't. Sikhs are really great. I love Sikhs. There's one guy, and he's also often on YouTube. And I had an interaction with him, and we got along well. And I think this is such a brilliant guy. He gave, was it Imran or was it Sources, the runaround? And he completely destroyed them. And then I was commenting, and then he said, why are you commenting like this if you're an atheist? Aren't you supposed to be contra me? And I said, no, I don't care what you believe, as long as your belief does not affect me. You can believe what you want. I think you can be a good guy. And I told him, I think you're a good guy. So this Sikh was really, really fantastic. And he taught me all this Guru Nanak thing and all this the background there. This was fascinating. So
how long ago was that?
About 3/4 of beginning of the year maybe.
Oh, okay.
So that was
yeah, because you don't get many Sikhs down there. We have, and every now and again there's one or two videos with a Sikh.
Oh, this is not on Speaker's Corner.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, from Speaker's Corner.
Okay, then was that it with the
yes? So over to you, sir.
No, I just want to spend a little bit of time on the Islamic text again, because I don't know, we seem to be doing this every 1 or 2 years, because people forget. Now the thing is that Islam is not something that you just sort of you pick up in a do-it-yourself manual. Islam, number one, is something that you learn by listening. It's an oral tradition, number one. Number two, the way that you then go deeper, then you start reading it. But there are 3 different levels of text here. Okay, so after you learn from your father, you go and you ask your imam. If he doesn't know this, you go to somebody in the cultural center or something like this. You go to a scholar, you ask them. And then they will go, and then they will tell you, okay, go and read the Quran, go and read this. And the problem with the Quran is they try and keep you away from the Quran as much as possible. They try and tell you the Quran says X, Y, and Z, because then they can already give you the interpretation. Now, this is the first level. This is the primary source of Islam, and that is the Quran. And that is why people say the Quran says X, Y, and Z, because this is the primary source. Nothing is supposed to go against the Quran. In reality, it doesn't work like that. But in theory, this is the way that it works. The Quran is the number one, the primary source, and this is the be-all and end-all and everything of every discussion. If the Quran says you are not allowed to eat pork, then it doesn't matter whether Muhammad propagates pork or if a scholar propagates pork, you are not allowed to eat pork, because the Quran says you're not allowed to eat pork. So that's the way that it is. The Quran is the law. Okay, sorry about that. I just have to cough sometimes when I talk.
No problem.
Then, because the Quran is vague and ambiguous, because there's 6,500 sentences arranged in 114 packed chapters, totally random. There's no structure. There's no index. There's absolutely nothing. It's all over the show. You sometimes get sentences with 3 different topics, and sometimes you have one topic over an entire chapter. So you can never say what a chapter contains by the header or whatever it is. So there's actually nothing that you can look up in the Quran. You have to know the whole book. I mean, it's not a lot. It's only 6,500 sentences. So there's no big deal. If you compare it to the Bible, which is something like 31,000 sentences, so the Quran is actually quite a thin booklet. The way that it's read is you have the chapter number 1, which is not actually part of the Quran, because this is only 7 lines, which is like the what is the prayer in Christianity? Is it the Lord's Prayer or the Father's Prayer or something like this?
Lord's Prayer, yeah.
Lord's Prayer. They also have this thing where everybody has knowledge of this one let's say, paragraph of something that everybody can mumble along. The same thing is with the Fatiha, with the opening. This is the first chapter in the Quran, where these 7 lines sort of, I mean, if you were a god, you wouldn't say, in the name of me, you know, the all-merciful, the best, and blah, blah, blah. Because this is exactly the way that it says it. It's in the name of the most merciful, the Lord of the worlds, the Lord. So it's very much a human being who is propagating the glamour of this God. So it can't really be a God saying this himself. So it's not really part of the Quran. And it's only 7 lines, so it doesn't really fit where it is it? Then the second chapter...
Before you get to that, quick question, if you do know, why or how was it included then right at the beginning? What was the...
Nobody knows. No, nobody, okay, nobody knows who sorted the Quran. Now, every Muslim will most probably agree that the first sentences to have been revealed, it is he who made you from a clot of blood, okay? And this is, I don't know why, every Muslim says, okay, this was the beginning, and then there are there's some speculation what the last ones were, and then you have people saying, well, there's the Mecca and the Medina ones because they are different in phraseology, in tempo, in structure, in everything. So, excuse me, they're different. And this is why people have come up with different kinds of categorization. So not only do you have the 114 chapters, you also have the use, so the even segments of the Quran to make it easier if you want to describe a sector or something. So you have different categorizations, but nobody knows who actually got them, who actually made them, who actually changed them, who went and said, okay, this should be first, this should be last, and why is it such a chaotic structure where it's not what people, you know, it's the longest at the beginning and the shortest at the end. It's not, even that is not true. The shortest one is only 3 lines, and this is somewhere towards the end. But the last one is not the shortest, and so on and so forth. So,
quick question before you carry on. Somebody, Omar 1986, is saying, stop spamming. Why should we accept your interpretation? Well, feel free, Omar, obviously, to give us, quote, your interpretation and tell us if you know why all of these things are. But yes, this is obviously somebody's questioning your, claiming that it's your interpretation. Stops.
No, these are facts. This is, I mean, everybody can count. There's 114 chapters. There's 6,500 sentences in this. I mean, how can that be wrong? You can count it. So there you go. Anyway, so nobody knows when the Quran came about, because we have sentences from the Quran from the 6th and even from the 5th century. The first complete existing Quran that we have today is from the 9th or 10th century. People always maintain, yeah, but we have the one in Tashkent and we have the Topkapi, and no, they're not complete, and they are different in contents. Like, for example, this is my primary example, the one I always go to because it's the easiest. No, it is not just a matter of pronunciation, because in chapter 37, sentence 101, in the Tashkent version, it says that they are Muslims, and in the 1924 Cairo edition, which is the one we have today, they are saying they are not. So it's the opposite. So if they are Muslims, they are not Muslims, it's the opposite. So there's a difference in content, and I have made videos where I show the photos where I'm showing that the alif, the thing that negates it, is missing. It's not there. Then you have, okay, let me not get into that. So the Quran is the primary text. Nobody knows how, when, where, what, and so on and so forth. So this is just down to speculation and down to interpretation. Then, because the Quran does not really give you anything, it tells you that you were created by this being, this Allah, this God. And Islam, by the way, does not mean peace, but it means submission, and Allah is just the name for God, and it means that this God created you to worship it, and that is all you are doing. You are submitting to this God, and this is your purpose in life. And peace in Islam is not the absence of war and crime and killing and destruction, but everybody is submitting to the same God. So there's a different interpretation and different definition of peace in Islam. Because
what about life being a test?
Okay, this is now the point. The Quran says you need to be tested. Even though God knows everything, you still need to be tested. But the problem is the Quran doesn't tell you how. The Quran does not tell you anything about prayer. That doesn't tell you how, what, where, when, and so on and so forth. So then Muslims say, well, then... Oops, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Then he came up with Muhammad because Moses and Jesus are both prophets in Islam. So now they needed an Arab prophet, so they came up with Muhammad, and they used the template of Jesus and Moses, because you see the parallels immediately. You know, there's a lot of action during birth, then there's decades of silence, and then all of a sudden you have a lot of action again, and then they die, and then they leave this fantastic inheritance, and the heritage, sorry. And you can see the parallels between the three immediately. Then Muhammad is there apparently to go and further detail and provide context to what the Quran mentions. Because the Quran mentions prayer, but does not specify it. So Muhammad has to come around and say, okay, this is how you pray. But even then, this is not enough, and this is where you need a third layer. So what you have is you have the bottom layer, the first layer, the primary source, which is the Quran. But the Quran is vague and ambiguous, doesn't really tell you anything. So therefore you need the second layer, which is then the Muhammad part, which is the sunnah, which consists of the hadiths and this biography. So the combination of those two give you the life of Muhammad, who is the role model of Islam, and what he says and does and thinks and dreams and tells people. Sorry?
Just comment in the just stops, because you seem to be by internet. Sorry, carry on, stops. I'll just see if in other people say you're breaking up. You patchy, so I'm not able to hear you that clearly. I'm just not sure if it's my internet or yours.
Oh, because
Probably mine.
I also hear you like dropping in and out at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not running anything else on the internet. Yeah.
Okay.
Carry on.
Then, so we have the Quran. We have the secondary text, which is the Sunnah. And this is where Muhammad now comes and says, okay, I'm going to give it context. I'm going to give it contents, where he specifies how to pray, but it's not enough. He says, okay, the Quran does not actually do things like prohibit certain things, which then Muhammad prohibits. So this is like an amendment to the Quran, because the Quran doesn't do everything. So then Muhammad comes along and he says, well, actually, what the Quran says is wrong. You need to listen to what I say. So Muslims listen to Muhammad more than what they listen to their God. And the thing is, if you tell God, well, he's a loser because he doesn't do that, Muslims will say, oh, well, bad, tough luck, well, he can take care of it. But if you do the same about Muhammad, they react totally different. So you're not allowed to criticize Muhammad in any way. So if you criticize Muhammad in any shape or form, then this is more blasphemous than it is to actually criticize the God. So this is the second layer, which is the sunnah. And then you need to appreciate that we are talking now. Now, the way that it works is that we have this narrative, we have the story, we have the fairy tale that once upon a time, a guy gets born in the desert in a tiny place in the town of Mecca, and it's the year of the elephant. Now you have a whole story around the elephant, which I'm not going to go into. This is translated to roughly 570, 571 AD or CE. The way that it works is the start of the calendar is not the birth of Muhammad. He is born in Mecca, but because he has been given the task of relating the Quran sentence by sentence. So an angel comes down, made out of light, squeezes Muhammad. I mean, something out of light squeezes this poor guy, and tells him Ikra, which now there's a huge dispute, which means read or recite or whatever, which he can't do. So God should have known this, but he sends an angel and tells him to do this. Now, angels only act on orders. So the angel Gabriel is sent down, finds this poor guy in a cave near Mecca somewhere in the mountains, and tells him that he needs to recite and he can't, and therefore then he teaches him sentence by sentence, word for word, the Quran. And then he goes off and relates, as he's a single source of everything. He goes to his companions and says, this is what God told me, you have to do this and this. They then tell some scribes who write down what he says, and this is later compiled, and this then becomes the Quran. But the problem is we don't know when, we don't know where this happens. There are stories that it was Uthman, we know that it could have been Umar, it could have been Abu Bakr, there are different versions, and some get destroyed and some don't, and then blah, 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 blah. So in the end, we have a Quran, but we don't know the origin. Now we have what I just said, the sunnah, the secondary text. We don't know when they actually were conceived or where they come from. We only know when they were collected, when they were being published. And this is 300, 200, 250, 300 years after this alleged date. Now, the way that it works is you have the date of the birth of Muhammad, you have the date 610 where the first revelation happens, you have the date 621 when he was chucked out of Mecca, or he fled Mecca and then he went to Medina. And this is when the start of the Islamic calendar is defined as being, and nobody really knows why. But this is then when Islam changes from religion to political ideology. This is when Islam actually starts. This is when the AH, the Anno Hijra, starts. And this is the beginning of Islam, according to Islamic texts. So 300 years later, we have the texts that I was just talking about. And then people say, Muhammad said this, he did this, and so on. But if you count all this, it's impossible for him to have done this because there are more sayings about what he did than, I mean, he would have had to live much longer and do a lot more and spend a lot more time saying things than what is actually recorded. But then this is still not enough. The way that it works is that a guy gets born in, I don't know, some country, the parents are Muslims, and they tell him there's God, there's Muhammad, and blah, blah, blah. And now he has a question. So he goes, Dad, if I pray, where do I put my hand? Because you're supposed to put your right hand over your left wrist and then fold them in front of your stomach. But now the thing is, do you do this above your belly button, on your belly button, or below your belly button? The thing is, in Islam, this is important. Everything is regulated. Like I say, even the foot that you enter the toilet with must be the left one. If you do the right one, that's bad news. That's really, really bad news, because then your God is really angry with you because you entered the toilet with the right foot, so that now the demons and the bad spirits that are on the toilet can now enter your now exposed body holes because you entered the toilet with the right foot. This is the level to which you are going. So the kid goes to his father and says, where do I put my hand? On the belly button, above or below? So dad says, son, I really don't know. Go ask the imam. Because you're not allowed to say anything. The imam has to say anything. So now he goes to the imam and says, Imam, where do I put my hands? And the imam says, oh, I don't know. He goes to the local imam conference. They don't know. So they go one level up. And now this is where the start of the daily routine, the way of life of Islam, this is where it manifests itself. These old men who get together, they decide what is happening. They decide what kind of a style the woman has to wear. They decide what angle your feet are when you are kneeling on the floor, whether they should be like as an A or a V, or should they be to one side or the left side? Should they be together? Should they be flat? They decide all this level of detail. So in other words, you have the Quran, which doesn't tell you anything. You have the Sunnah, which tells you a little bit, but not everything. And then you have the so-called scholars who then go and then decide on the daily level of practicing Islam. And this is how the whole thing works. And this is now where Islam is complete, where, unfortunately, you still have open questions. And now you have the fourth level, which are now the TV stations and the call-in shows and all these apologetic channels where people call in and say, am I allowed to bring a Christmas cake if I am invited to a Christian girl's birthday party? Because this you can't find in the Quran, you can't find in the hadiths, you can't find in the scholars. And so this is now the everyday interpretation of what is allowed and not in Islam. So these are the different levels of text that you get. Now, in the hadiths, the problem is that the Quran is vague, ambiguous, and it contradicts itself. Okay? The problem is that the hadiths contradict itself, now each other, in themselves, and they contradict the Quran. Now, what are you supposed to do? Like, for example, in voodoo, I mean, how you wash yourself. You know, this ritualistic washing. In the Quran, it's not mentioned. In the Hadith, it says Muhammad washed himself once. Okay, so we know we need to do the wudu once, which means that you need to take water or sand or something like this, and you need to rub your hands, you're in between your dada and your ears and everything. Brilliant. But then a few sentences later, it says Muhammad washed himself twice. Ooh, shit, now what? Well, if it says once, so once is good, but twice is better because it's more. So let's do it twice. But then another hadith pops up which says, no, you need to do it 3 times. So you need to do it 3 times. Okay, what happens with the sentence which says 2 times and the sentence which says once? So there's a huge, big dilemma here in the text because they are contradicting one another. So people are now very clever saying, well, the alcohol and the drug-related sentences in the Quran, they were revealed gradually. How do they know that? Well, I don't know. There is nobody who could tell them why this is supposed to be gradual. This is a sheer matter of interpretation. And the Quran does not say that it's prohibited. It's just that you should avoid what the devil does or what the devil gives you. But it doesn't talk about alcohol. It doesn't tell you about any of these things. It's only in the hadiths then which contradict the Quran and say, no, you're not allowed to do that. The same with the stoning. The same with the killing of apostates. The Quran hints at it. Yes, you can interpret it that way, but you can interpret it another way. It's only in the hadiths then which says, kill him. If somebody leaves the religion, if somebody leaves Islam, kill them. And this is the hadiths then that make the Islamic ideology, the political ideology, because the political ideology is mainly what Islam is, because it governs the existence and the cooperation and co-living, cohabitation of Muslims, of people together. And this is why it's political. And this is where the whole thing comes from. This is where the people get all their ideas from the hadiths. And then because they're not enough, then they have to go to the scholars, and the scholars then over the last 1,000 years have come up with the different rulings for different things on what you're supposed to do. So those are the different levels of different texts, and this is why it's such a huge mess where anybody can say anything and still find something somewhere in the hadith somewhere. This is why somebody like, what was his name, Saracen, he said, well, yeah, Aisha says that she was 6 when she was married, so she was like a kid, and no, she wasn't 6. She was actually 17. How does he get that right? Well, there's a sequence somewhere where it mentions her sister. And now the sister is older than she is, and she went with the sister to a battle, but children were not allowed there, so they had to be 15 at the age when they went and watched a battle. So she must have been 15, and because her older sister was there, when the older sister got married, then she was there, and she was a bridesmaid, so she must have been 17 when she got married to Muhammad. Okay, where do they get all this from? Well, this is just projection. They just take little bits and pieces and fit them together until they get the picture that they want. Because the problem is that most Muslims today are better than their God. And they don't like all this thing with slavery. They don't like all this idea that Muhammad is a pedophile. So they're trying to protect Muhammad. They're trying to protect everything and trying to change the contents of those things. And this is how they do it. They use the various hadiths and the various interpretations, and they use the vagueness and the ambiguity of the text to create whatever they want. And like things like music. Why is music prohibited? Well, go and ask a Muslim and he will tell you, well, because Muhammad said it's prohibited. What is it based on? Well, it's based on the Quran. But where in the Quran does it mention music? It doesn't. And then all you see is that idle talk is not so well received by this God. And then all of a sudden you get from idle talk to wasting your time, and then music is a waste of time, and therefore music is not seen good, and therefore it gets prohibited. And this is what it boils down to. You know, it's the interpretation of some vague text.
Great job. I want to welcome Lillian as well. Lily, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Feel free to share there. Stops has given us a crash course. And according to obviously the one or two of the commenters, that's his narrative.
Yeah,
feel
and
free
that's
to share your
that's his
thoughts.
narrative because that's his interpretation. I agree. You know, the funniest thing about the Quran is how vague it has the possibility of being, and how that's used as an excuse. Like, hey, you know, this is your interpretation, and that's you know that other guy's interpretation, and it's different for each person who reads it, or it has different meaning for you every time you read it. You can read it like 3 times and get different things out of it every time you read it. And I remember being told that as a child, like, you know, that's the thing about it. It's supposed to be sold as a good thing, the fact that you can read it and get different meaning out of it at the same time at different times. But, you know, we can clearly see that that's a bad thing. If it was supposed to be a manual for all time, it should have been quite clear. It's just really funny to me that it's made
It's
to
my turn as
be,
well.
you know, it's touted to be such a perfect book, but then it's just so like vague. And even things that aren't vague at all, they'll still manage to do these like semantics and twist the phrase to mean what they want it to mean, and say this is my interpretation or your interpretation. You're not smart enough to read this sentence and understand what he meant, so you need a scholar, someone to tell you what it actually means. But yeah.
Well, and then you have the thing with the Arabic as well.
Yeah. Hey, I have to go do something, but I'm still listening.
Okay.
But I'll be back in a second. You guys can keep
That's
on.
another thing that will try and get you away from the Quran by saying, well, you can't really read it. You don't really know what it says until you go and you study ancient Arabic, because the Quran is written in ancient Arabic. So unless you go and study it, because it's a dead language, you can't grow up in it. You can't, you don't speak ancient Arabic. You speak Arabic, but not this version of Arabic from 1,000 years ago. And therefore they say, well, you can't really know what you are reading until you learn ancient Arabic. Well, then people have done that. They went and studied ancient Arabic, and they said, well, now it's me who's saying it says beat your wife. Well, then where did you study this? Well, I was in the university in Arabic, but this is the wrong university. You should have studied it there. Then they would have given you the correct version of the ancient Arabic. So, this whole argumentation is absolutely nonsense. Forget it. We are living in the 21st century where we do have interpretations, and if a God would have wanted to make himself clear in a way that everybody understands it, then I'm sure a perfect God, an almighty God, would have been able and capable of doing that.
That's my biggest thing as well, isn't it? It's the fact that if in fact this book is supposed to be for all time, for all people, then that's highly problematic. If you claim it's for the 7th century and there was a message there, you've got less of a hassle. This whole thing of trying to make it fit for all time, for all people is just one of the biggest downfalls that I can see. But you're right, it is subjective, especially with the interpretation, isn't it? So there you've got a book and it doesn't tell you everything. And that's why whenever, it's fascinating if you ask a Muslim or even a scholar something that's not in the Quran, hadiths, whatever, what is their view on human cloning, on embryonic stem cell research, on something that the Quran would never talk about? What's their view? What are they going to do now? Because obviously the Quran does not, or the hadiths or whatever, it doesn't cover every eventuality, can't predict, strangely enough, what humans will do in the future. And so now you have this area where some information's out there. How do we know? Are we ambivalent? Is it good? Is it bad? How do we know? Now we have a system that we could use, but my claim is that religionists don't. And now they have, like you say, they have to go and interpret, go and look for a verse, whatever the case is. As soon as there's a scientific discovery, let's go and find something and try and make it fit.
There was, I don't know, do you follow the Freedom from Religion Foundation?
I've heard of it. I don't follow it per se. But
okay, because they had the annual convention, okay, and they had a whole Arabs. They have this annual convention, and they have a lot of speakers there. And this one guy, he's a professor of a lot of things. I don't know how many things he actually teaches. Steven Pinker, he came up with a set of slides where he showed the advances that human beings have made over the last 1,500 years, or maybe even 2,000 years. And he is showing how human beings have improved on God's design and have done much better than any of the gods in the 50,000 years prior to that. And he has shown how infant mortality has gone down, how life expectancy has gone up, how the number of rapes, the number of slaves, the number of, whatever it is, he had a slide on this. And he shows that we have improved much more than any god has managed ever. And this is incredibly interesting what he has what he has shown there.
Yeah. And with artificial intelligence coming and starting to improve, it could be that within the next 100 years or less, we will create sentient, whatever you want to call them, that are superior to us in many, if not most, perhaps even at some point in every way. And so what happens then? What are people then going to say? Where the creators have been surpassed by their creation. And that seems to be the case as you are talking about it now, but it could well happen, perhaps not in our lifetime, but certainly in the next generation's lifetime. So, I mean, even like, with the so-called perfect eye or whatever the case is, I mean, all of these things, we surpassed it, not all in one specific thing, but faster cameras, better low light, whatever the case may be, and other animals as well. So all of these sort of things just, should give theists pause, but they don't. Why not? They don't want to confront it. They don't want to think about it. Then they've got to go and find some answer that will give them some peace or allow them to sleep at night. But if they were really critical thinking, they'd be going, hang on a moment, there's just too many things here that are problematic. Maybe we need to take a step back and maybe think about this and engage the critical thinking, perhaps be a bit more agnostic on some of these claims. Especially again, going back to the old one, the old chestnut that we've done so many times. I saw it again recently. And it was on a hangout recently as well that I was just listening into and face palming with the whole beginning of the universe. Again, nobody knows these things. So why not be agnostic? And obviously the reason being, you have a book that has made some claims and you've got to stick with them. The moment you say you're agnostic, now you are challenging the authenticity or the abilities of the book itself. And so you have to go along with the book, and now you've got to find reasons. And when some of us listen to these reasons, we're going, holy crap, you just don't know anything about it. You've listened to somebody else that's thought about it for 5 minutes, and the best they can come up with is a half-baked idea that in any other sphere of your life, they would not come forward with those sort of claims. But because you have a supernatural claim in a book that you've got to adhere to, you now have to find reasons. It's the complete opposite methodology of science. Start with your conclusion and work to confirm it. Where science starts with a hypothesis and looks to disprove it or confirm it, whichever way. We just look out there. So, yeah, it's hugely problematic. And
I just want to address something quickly in the chat. I would not be effective in Speaker's Corner because I'm too blunt. What Muslims need is they need hope. They need somebody to sit there, be very quiet, and let the other person, let the Muslim talk, and make it look as though you are listening and that you are contemplating what it is that they are saying, so that they think there is hope that you can be converted. Because, I don't know, we've talked about the point system in Islam. They want the 2,500 points, all right? That's what they're after. And this is why...
Where did that come from?
Sorry?
Where does the 2,500 points come from?
We've done so many shows on that. The point system in Islam. They want the. I mean, Islam is a very egotistical ideology, because you are doing everything for yourself. You can't go and plead for somebody else to be let into heaven. You need to gather the points so that you can go into heaven, and only once you are in heaven, or if you go as a martyr, then you can do something for somebody else. But you can't here now go and pray and say, I want my mummy to go to heaven because she's so sick. Why don't you take her to heaven now? You can't do that in Islam. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to convert you, because they are getting bonus points for that. And if you go there and you say, listen, mate, there's not a chance because you're talking absolute shit, it doesn't work. Then they know right from the beginning, there is no hope that you are going to convert and they're going to leave you alone. They're not interested in talking to you.
Oh, right. Okay. I mean, some of them are like that, obviously, but I get you from what you're saying. These are people that are looking for their quote points. And so they'd walk away there knowing that they've got no chance of scoring any points with you.
Like this, I forgot his name. The little guy who's wearing this baseball cap. Mansour, there you go. He's like that. Yes, I mean, if he doesn't see a chance, if sees that somebody knows their stuff, he will just walk away. It's not interesting. Oh,
okay. I've not really sort of looked at it in that way. I think the only time I've seen him sort of somewhat walk away is with the Bob the Builder Christian fella who seems to know a little bit about Islam and comes and challenges them. But then, of course, I listen to Bob. I've given Pentecostal the link, by the way, just for fun.
No.
He asked. But
Why?
anyway, I listened to Bob talk to Steve. Steve is an atheist in Speaker's Corner. And that's, of course, where he fell down, because now he was challenging the atheist, which he's now stepping into our territory. It's great.
It doesn't work anymore. Yeah.
It's great when he's talking to the Muslims and he's quoting their hadiths and showing them that their approach is inconsistent when, you know, they're attacking the Bible and he's asking for references from the Quran and they can't give it. When they ask for references on the Bible, they expect references and they're not able to do it. And so he's trying to show the inconsistencies. But then he started speaking to Steve, the sort of biology guy, the sort of heckler fellow with the glasses. And then, of course, it became the old tired arguments. And that's unfortunately where I saw it break down for him is, you know, he's just doing what he's heard before, because it's much tougher to challenge us than it is to challenge the theists, because they've got a book, you can read it or not, or you can find it or not. But to challenge us, it's a bit more difficult. And so all he did was go with the old, the universe and all that sort of stuff, fine tuning or whatever it was. I can't remember now. And I'm like, oh dear, you know, you did sound like you were, you know, reasonably on the ball when you were challenging the Muslims, but now you came and tried it with Steve. Shame I wasn't there to chat to him about that, or others. I mean, there's so many other people. And I think that's where, unfortunately, you know, he just showed that he was the same as any other theist, challenging us on our, quote, non-belief, or it's not even our non-belief, it's our non-belief in a sense. Give me your thoughts, Stotts. So the fact that we do not believe their claims, there's some inferences that you can draw about that, which is, tell me if you agree or not, is that we obviously we don't have a belief in a supernatural. We reject the theist claim of a supernatural belief. And so we are, what's the word? We are, then they have to fall back on something else in some sense.
Well, realist.
So be it a realist, an idealist, a naturalist, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
Just not a supernaturalist. And so now obviously the question comes, well, how do you know this? How do you know that? Whatever the case may be. And obviously we don't have certainty in certain areas.
Exactly. And I don't need to.
Well, there you go. But they see this as a weakness, of course. If you don't have certainty,
this is exactly the strength. I think this is why they're failing, because they know this is always the problem. This is always what I tell people. You know, we live in Europe here, okay? People know how to handle Nazis. People know how to handle extremists. People know how to handle communists. People know how to handle all these people, but they don't know how to handle Islam. Because it's this wild mixture where they're claiming it's a religion, but it's not. And now the Christians are too shit scared to criticize Islam, because they know that the moment they start criticizing Islam, the way that they criticize us can be used against them equally. This is why Muslims are very comfortable challenging Christians, because they know they are, well, equally deluded. You know, they're equally stupid. They're equally you know, convinced that there's this God. And some people even say that there's the son of a God who is God, and then there's actually something that lands on the shoulder, which is a dove, which is actually a spirit that you can't see, and then the three of them are God. And then, of course, it's very easy to challenge that. Okay, so then they go to an atheist and they try this, and it doesn't work, and they fall horribly short. And this is why they don't really like discussing or talking to atheists, because they know they're going to see their asses.
Yeah,
Unless they can bullshit them, and this is why this is what I hate so much. This is why I'm looking at a video at the moment. I can't even remember which one. I'm looking at so many. Oh yes, it's the they bullshit people. Oh yeah, I know. This is the guy who just talks. He goes to atheists, all right, or he just talks to people. He's called Speaker's Corner, but it's not. He talks to people in Leicester Square. And he is such a dishonest asshole. This is amazing. And then he still goes and begs for money. And I'm going to do this video next.
Who's this?
I can't remember. I'm just putting this together. I'm just looking at the different bits and pieces.
But it's a Muslim guy, is he? Doing da'wah?
Yeah, it's a Muslim guy. It's a Muslim guy who tells these non-Muslims that the Quran is so magic and wonderful and everything because everything is true. Because the Rosetta Stone mentions Haman, and Haman is in the Quran, and therefore science confirms the contents in the Quran. And if modern age science confirms the contents of the Quran, that means only one thing, and it must be by God. It's stupid, it's ridiculous, and it's a lie. They deceive people. They just bullshit people thinking that if I pile lie after lie after lie on top of everything, they're going to believe me because they can't check it, because we're on the road somewhere. They can't check it. So it doesn't matter what I tell them. They will have to believe it because I'm a Muslim, and of course they have to believe what I say. And this is how they make their points. And it is so dishonest. It's amazing. But that's the only way they can go and address non-believers, non-Muslims.
Yeah, I think that the doing things out in the street and your level of certainty has a lot to do with it. So from a psychological point of view, if you come across as extremely certain about something, oftentimes somebody who's less certain and certainly doesn't have particular knowledge in the subject is likely to believe you based on your certainty. There's like a human psychological, whatever you want to call it, built-in thing where we automatically seem to accept something when somebody has got a high level of certainty. It's a subconscious thing. Oh, well, they must know what they're talking about. They sound like they know it. They're very confident in what they believe or what they're saying, and therefore they're likely to be true. And of course, this has been used either consciously or subconsciously by people who can't possibly have that level of certainty. And people then, do fall for that sort of thing, which is, quite unfortunate. But, that's typically what can happen with those sort of things. But science is one of the easiest ones to disprove. And a few of the Muslims avoid science. They know that that's just not a good way to argue. If pressed, they might begrudgingly say there's some pointers towards science, but some of the Muslims that have been around the block a little bit just won't go near science. It's just the easiest one. But again, if you've never heard this and somebody approaches you and they're giving you a bit of a spiel and it sounds even marginally plausible and you don't know anything, you're like some people who aren't engaging in critical thinking, even non-believers, are likely to go, well, that could be the case. I don't know, whatever the case is. Instead of going, hang on a moment, you've made a supernatural claim or you've made an extraordinary claim, provide me the evidence, and your explanation isn't in and of itself good enough. But a lot of people
or totally irrelevant.
Say again, or
totally irrelevant.
Irrelevant in what sense?
In any way showing that there's a God or anything. It doesn't prove your point. It's a non sequitur.
Well, they think it does in the sense that, hey, if in fact the Quran predicted this thing and we've only now come to see it's true, well, that must mean that there's something. So there's the inference there that only, something supernatural or extraordinary could have done that, because Muhammad and his crew couldn't have known this sort of stuff. So he must have got that information from somebody or something that did know this stuff.
Yeah, this is what I did with Adnan. This is what Adnan did last night in the video that I watched last night. Exactly. How could he have known that? Well, he didn't write the Quran. I mean, he was given it sentence bit by bit. So he didn't write it at the end of the day, according to the story. And then the problem is that Islam is dying, okay? And people realize this. And this is why they're getting so desperate now. This is why somebody said in the chat now, well, have you seen the praying tree? Yeah, and the praying rock and and all these other things. This is so funny. Because they're getting desperate. This is why you get the 19 miracle, you get all these different things where they're saying, oh, but you must be in awe of this book because there's so many things in there. Look at Islam and there's these signs of God everywhere where you look. Come on, give me a fucking break. Give me something real. Give me something that I can actually go and work with, that I can go and verify. Don't give me this bullshit. Yeah, there were these two armies and one of them won, and that's why there's a God. That doesn't work. I don't get it why they're doing it. And just as Rob just said, you get all these funny claims made by them regarding science. Why does anybody need science? Islam is the opposite of science, and gods don't need science. They're beyond science. So why would anybody require science to verify the Quran?
And of course they, in a way, it's kind of self-refuting for them, because the other part of the claim is, oh well, science can change. So why would you? That's why I say to some Muslims or theists in general, why even bother with science? Just say it's on faith. Just say I believe on faith. Why would they not do that? Of course, because nobody's going to take that seriously. Because anybody could say anything about faith. But the moment you start to use science, well, now we can go and test it. But of course, then they kind of refute themselves by saying, well, it could change. Well, why use it then? Or are you only going to use the parts that agree with your book now? What happens when those parts that you currently agree with, which you are claiming to be scientific, what happens if that changes? Are you then going to accept the change, or are you then going to kick in with your same old story? Oh no, but science changes. Well, then be consistent. Either don't use science at all, or accept the best science, the best evidence that we have at the moment. Some things are very unlikely to change, be it evolution, be it some of the cosmological claims, whatever. There's many things that are very unlikely to change. But now, of course, you get down to the point where now it very quickly slides into, without most people realizing, into a philosophical argument. Oh, well, can you be absolutely sure? Now, just because I've looked into a little bit of philosophy, I'm by no means a student, I can't say absolutely sure. But those people who haven't, in some sense, they're unencumbered with that. And they could say, yes, I'm absolutely sure that there's no ways that we're going to suddenly find out, unless you're a flat earther, shout out to Ian there, that the earth goes around the sun. Sorry, the sun goes around the earth. We know that the earth goes around the sun, and we've done measurements, we've tested that, and we've got hundreds of years of experience. So, there's virtually no chance. And that's all we need. We don't need to go to 100% certainty in a philosophical point of view, because once you start going down there, then it gets down to radical skepticism or solipsism, which is, how can you know anything? And that, while it's interesting to talk about, it's not really very useful in practice. And so I'm quite happy to say we know that the sun goes around the earth. Is there any chance from a practical point of view that that's going to change? No, not until or if suddenly the solar system gets disrupted. And so I'm going to bet my house, everything I have, I'll bet my life that the sun is going around the earth and that's not changing. They are those sort of facts that we can know. And now trying to bring in philosophy there just to show a bit of doubt, I think, is disingenuous, because they will accept certain facts as well. So either they've got to accept no facts, or they've got to accept certain facts that we would accept at the same sort of level. But I don't see the consistency, I'm afraid, which is par for the course, unfortunately, with Muslims. Either don't accept science, you pick it, because you're doing that all the time. There's my little rant on that sort of thing.
Yeah, 100% spot on. Yeah.
So Pentecostal, if you want to join us,
please don't.
How much longer we'll go for?
I have my own little theory, I guess, about the people who have it's not really a theory, it's just like how I think of it. Somebody who portrays this level of certainty, like they say things with such conviction, and therefore you're supposed to believe that, just because they believe it so strongly, they must be right, or they think they're right and other people think they're right. It's like if you go to a doctor and you're asking the doctor, to give you a diagnosis, you tell them the symptoms that you have, and you want to know what's wrong with you, what sickness or whatever it is. Would you rather have a doctor who admits to you, I'm not 100% sure what this is that you have, and we have to do further tests? Or would you rather have a doctor that says, it's this, I'm absolutely certain that you have this thing right here, and then you later find out that it's not it's not the sickness that he said that you have? So, and then some people actually prefer a doctor who operates on absolute certainty, and they think that that makes him more experienced or more knowledgeable, and that they should go back to him. And that's, I guess, a preference. It's like, I feel like that's kind of ignorant when I see somebody who prefers to go to doctors who are so certain, rather than someone willing to admit, I'm not 100%. maybe you have
Good
this.
point. Excellent. Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. I think a lot of people are looking for certainty, whether it just makes them feel better. Because if somebody comes across as very certain, like you say, a lot of people go, I want a doctor who's certain. Because obviously they wouldn't accept a doctor who's certain if you had to tell them the story of, hey, which would you prefer? And then you find out that's not the case. I mean, when at the time that they're being given the diagnosis by the doctor, the higher the level of certainty, the more some patients will feel at ease, because, hey, here's an authority figure. They've got a lot of knowledge. They're giving me a lot of certainty, and people want that, especially if they're uncomfortable or they don't know, whatever. So a great deal of the humanity, I would suggest, does want certainty, which, as you quite rightly say, is oftentimes misplaced. But certainty wins, and we can see it as well. Even with people that
because
don't know
it's
what they're talking
fine
about.
when they have the certainty, but then later on when you find out that you were misdiagnosed, what's your reaction going to be? Oh, he was so sure. Are you going to be in denial? Like, no, I do have what he said, or maybe I have something else too. Like jumping through these hoops to try and excuse the fact that you were misdiagnosed, and the only reason you accepted the diagnosis in the first place is because of how certain the doctor was.
Yeah, but Lilith, this is the point. If you are that certain, you're going to go to the next doctor. You're going to ask him, are you certain? And he will say, yeah, but now here I'm really certain. And then that person is going to say, well, the first one was wrong, but now this one really knows what he's doing. Because the people have this propensity. You have this idea, this attitude towards this. You are gullible. You are going to believe it. I've got a friend who said to me, and you send your wishes to the universe so that the hurricane is going to avoid the island because her daughter is there. I said, look, there is no way that you can influence a hurricane. There is no way that you can do that. And then what happens if you fail? Does that mean that you failed or the universe failed? Are you then going to be held responsible if something happens to your daughter? Come on, don't do that. And then I said, well, apparently your universe was so busy diverting the hurricane from the island that it forgot to do something in Mexico where a couple of people died, and 100 people died in India in flooding. And what about the people in Taipei and this thing here and this thing here? We have catastrophes every single day on this planet. You can't go and say, yeah, just because it's my daughter, now the universe has to change the whole plan so that my daughter can be saved and divert this hurricane. But people have this idea, this concept, this attitude. They want to feel this. And she said to me, please don't destroy this, but I have this hope. At least this gives me hope. I said, no, it does not give you hope. It's only giving you the thing that you believe that you are doing something and it doesn't work. That's what can you do?
Yeah, I'm just looking in the chat there. Some BJ was responding to somebody. I can't see who it was, but this thing about scientism. I'm sure you'll love that one as much as I do, Stops.
Oh, is that a new religion?
No, it doesn't. No, scientism exists. The scientism is really something where somebody says and goes, well, everything is science. And please, I mean, any kind of extremism for me is stupid. So you can't have scientism because not everything is going to be solved by science. It just doesn't work that way. So, yeah.
Okay, Stops, interesting question for you. Again, in principle, I guess, and maybe that's the difference. What do you think could not be solved by a branch of science, which would incorporate anything that investigates what I would consider the natural world in principle, if we had the right technology, level of knowledge, etc.? What is it you think could not be found out or delved into in principle?
Okay, I'll give you a real life situation that I was confronted with a couple of months ago. I got a call 2 o'clock in the morning by a doctor who asked me, to what level do we reanimate your mother?
Was that a joke from somebody? Really funny?
No. My mother was in hospital.
To what level?
The thing is, her respiratory system failed. So she was put on a heart-lung machine. And then something else happened, and the doctor called me and said, to what level do we reanimate her? Do we do something Do we give her injections? Do we go and do a transplant? Do we do whatever? They asked me a question: to what level do you want your mother alive? And as from when do we let her die? This is a real life situation.
Because the first question kind of didn't sound.
Sorry.
That you asked it.
What level do we reanimate? Means if the lung fails, you get put on this machine, which it sort of supports the lungs by breathing for the lungs, just to get the oxygen flow in the body going. So it's a reanimation thing to get the lungs working again. But now what happens if the kidneys now pack up because the lungs packed up for 2 minutes or something, and the kidneys didn't really get enough oxygen, and they're starting to pack up? Do they now start thinking about a kidney transplant? Or do they say, no, we're not going to reanimate an old person to this level, and now this person has had enough and we're going to let them die peacefully? But this is the question that I was asked, where there is no way that any scientific endeavor or any kind of scientific program or anything can help you answer this question.
But again, if I were to ask it to you in principle, maybe this is not an easy thing, because I do, not you personally, but I certainly see theists struggle with this, in the sense that if we had enough knowledge and the expertise and scientific equipment, we would know precisely even if you wanted to quantify it with a percentage, we would be able to do that. Now, we can't do it today, and I think that's one of the confusions that I notice with people, is that they go, okay, well, we can't. There's no way. What they really mean is there's no way we could know today. But if you fast forward 100 years, 200 years, whatever the case is, because if we look back 500 years, people in the past could say there's no ways you would be able to tell how far away the sun is, and now we know within number of kilometers the sun is from the Earth. If you fast forward another 200 years, it could be that the medical abilities are so good that they could tell you within a percentage point, or whatever term they want to use to quantify something, when your mom would die or what needs to be done. They wouldn't even ask you the question. They go, hey, do you know what? Here's the answer. And that's really the question that I'm asking: is there anything in the world, in the natural world, given the what's the term? In principle, the scientific method covering every single domain could not answer within this universe?
Oh, and thanks for asking. Yes, she made it. She pulled through and out of hospital.
Oh, fantastic. And I want to welcome back an old panelist of ours, Raven. Welcome. How are you, my good sir?
Hey, I'm okay. Just getting used to this new laptop.
There you go. Welcome back. I haven't seen you for a long time. If at some point you want to share a bit of your story that you shared with me, I haven't shared it with anybody because we spoke quietly separately. But if you, at some point you want to share that, then do that. If not, all good.
I wouldn't mind, but this is the Jinn and Tonic Show, not the Raven Wines show.
Well, what we can do is do it in an after show. So when we finish up where I'll edit it and chop the rest off.
Okay. I don't mind. I just, I don't want to distract from the show or anything like that.
All right. Well, let's keep it for a bit later, and you can tell us a bit of what's happened and why we haven't seen you and so forth for a little while.
Yeah, if people are interested.
People would be interested. I was fascinated and had some thoughts on it. So we'll come back to that for sure.
Well,
obviously, you've heard some of what we talked about tonight. You've heard some of what we've talked about tonight. So have you got any thoughts? And just by the way, Lilith, welcome. So Raven, you might not know Lilith. Lilith, this is Raven. She's next.
Yeah, I'm pretty new.
Okay. Yeah, I'm mostly familiar with your fictional counterparts.
What?
I said no. I'm not. I'm mostly familiar with your fictional counterparts.
Oh, the biblical character.
Well, technically, it's not biblical. It's Talmudic.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Yeah, interestingly enough, there's only one mention of Lilith, in Islamic theology, which I find quite disappointing. Yeah, but when it comes to Islam, the only mention of Lilith I've ever found was in a book of demonology, written by, I think it was about 500 years ago. But I find the story of Lilith absolutely fascinating, especially when it comes to the Abrahamic view of women.
Yep, that's exactly why I picked the name. But I don't know too much about biblical and Talmudic stuff. I just know more about the Islamic stuff, obviously.
Well, the
But,
idea, I mean,
it's mostly
it kind of comes into the idea of women being impure and the whole thing about women coming from Adam's rib. I mean, I don't know if anyone actually wants to hear the story of Lilith.
again, but I don't know. Impurity of women is a huge theme in Islam, so it kind of makes sense. They could have used it.
Well,
But,
both of them are. I mean, the whole idea. If you actually look at every single story in the Bible and in the Quran and in the hadiths, when it comes to men and women, it's always women fucking over men, and it's never the other way. It's like a good woman is either obedient or an evil whore.
Yeah, there's no middle ground. And
well, no, because that shows that women are human beings. Can't have that.
Jeez, that's on.
God, Lilith, look at that picture of your whore. Where is your hijab?
Oh, I feel like the first attacked on
Maybe that's another
PTSD.
show that we can do. Is Islam's view on women. I think we know it, but it might be interesting to.
It's
Lilith,
so
you should
difficult.
definitely join from the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Cool. Thanks. The thing about Islamic view on women is that, like I told you before, that my stepdad was an imam and he used to do sermons.
Just mute yourself there, Raven, when you're on speaking, because we're getting feedback, or put some headphones on, because I can hear Lilith getting feedback through your speakers.
Okay, he's on mute. Yeah, I was just gonna say that, interestingly, so growing up, my stepdad had a series of sermons, and it was titled Women in Islam, Part 1 and 2. And they were very popular. A lot of people bought them. And why? Because it wasn't really women in Islam. It should have been titled Muslim Women in the Western World. How Western society has influenced how Muslim women are treated and not the other way around. I feel like going back and listening to it again, because a lot of the ideas and stuff that he would promote, try to make Muslims seem more moderate, were actually just Western ideas and societal standards that he was imposing on Islam, and not the other way around. They do that a lot. And there's this specific myth, and I have been trying to find the cause of it. I've been trying to get to the root of it for like 2 years now, and I have never found it, right? It's kind of explicit, but I've heard it multiple times. It's just this thing that's been going around. It's like a rumor, and there's like this BuzzFeed video of this Muslim chick going to explain very condescendingly to a non-Muslim chick the real place of a woman in Islam. And she says this thing. She goes, in Islam, a woman has a right to pleasure. The man, the husband is required to give that to his wife. And I have yet to find any hadith or anything and I've heard multiple Muslims say this. I don't know where they're getting this from. I would love it if this was actually true. I wish I could find it.
Stops. Is there anything like that you've come across? And by the way, Lilith, Answer's saying you've got a very sexy voice in the chat, and somebody else is saying for real. So you have a few admirers out there.
Oh my God.
I just thought I'd throw that your way.
Don't
have you come across anything that where or the origin that these particular claims could have come from?
Hadith.
Okay, and what is it? What's
yeah, but what hadith? I have been like literally searching for this hadith.
This is exactly what I was trying to allude to earlier. You need to take different ones from different perspectives, and then show how. Okay, you know the one where the what is it? Heaven is beneath the mother's foot, or something like that, or mother's feet.
Oh God, I hate that one.
I know, but then you take these ones, and there's a whole group of them, and I can't remember which one it is. It's not sunnah.com. There's a page which actually groups them, where you can find all the hadiths for a specific topic, and you will find that for the mothers and for the females, the real situation of a woman is then they take these 10 hadiths. And that's how it's concocted. It's like you put everything in a pot, you stir it a bit, you add a little bit of spicing, and there out comes this story where everything is wonderful and Muslim is for women only.
Women, or at least women are included. It's not for women
Well,
only.
it's almost the matriarchy, really.
Obviously for
Yeah.
It's for men, but like women have like equal rights, but you have to redefine the word equal for them to have equal rights.
No, it's a thing that men are being.
You can be a Muslim feminist. You know why I hate that the heaven is under the mother's feet? If you stop and think about it, okay, heaven is under your mother's feet, so you do what? You worship your mother and you grovel at her feet because you're basically using her to get to heaven. So it's still not a good thing because it has nothing to do with her going to heaven. It's all about how the man can use the woman to get to heaven. And there's another hadith.
That's exactly it. This is what people don't really understand here. How this is. Have you heard the argument?
Oh, the mother's put up in such a high place. There's another hadith that says if a father has a daughter and she is a virgin and she dies a virgin, then the father will go to heaven.
Have you heard the argumentation? If you ask a Muslim, why is it that women can't have 4 men?
Because she won't know who the dad is.
Exactly.
No, there's a bunch of silly things like that.
Exactly, but this is the way that it's generated, or everything is geared towards the man. So you need to know who the dad is. That's much more important than the woman who's giving birth and taking care of the baby and feeding and breastfeeding and everything. No, that doesn't count. It's the dad who placed the sperm there. He is the more important factor. That's how ridiculous it is.
There's so many, and then they managed to, I don't know how they twist it around to make it seem like, this is a good thing. Oh, here's another one. It says who you're supposed to love. Well, first of all, you're supposed to love Allah above all, and then after that, who you're supposed to love and respect, your mom, and then your mom, and then your mom, and then your dad. So they're like, look, this is proof that the woman, well, not the woman, the mother specifically, is the one who's supposed to be placed above everyone. It's not like respect your sister. There's really not anything about that.
Well, like, one of the things I picked up on is, sorry. One of the things I picked up on when you said that women are supposed to be equal in Islam, you have to define what equality means, because it's not in the sense that most people know. Women are equal women can be equal in certain ways, but the meaning of equality is vastly different to what people understand it. Women aren't equal in the sense that they have equal rights. They have set roles.
Exactly. So how's that equality then?
Well, it's not equality in the way that people understand it today. And when it comes to the idea of fatherhood as opposed to motherhood, reading the Quran actually shows a very ancient Greek understanding is that the woman is basically a vessel, and everything that makes a baby comes from sperm.
Yeah, that's right. Comes from the dad. We all come from our dads. Like that's the most important thing to remember. Dads are the ones that make us.
There's a Native American saying I was quite fond of. It said, you never know for sure who your father is, but you always know who your mother is.
Exactly. Interesting question. Ask a Muslim, would you kill your child if Allah told you to?
It's usually yes, because they don't believe that he'll actually let you kill him, because they think that at the very last second he's going to do a magic switcheroo with your child, and a lamb is going to pop up in the place, and you're going to prove your faithfulness and your loyalty to God. So it's a trick question, or no, it's the question isn't a trick question. The answer is a trick answer.
But it also
won't outright say yes.
This God is. Somebody asked in the beginning, why do we say that God is bad? That's why. Because this is actually a question that people are asking. Because this is actually something that this God apparently did. That's why it's a bad dude.
I mean, can we think about the emotional turmoil that the father was supposed to go through the entire time he was thinking? He was torn between being faithful to his God and, the love that he had for his son. Unfortunately, in the end, he chose his God, and the moral should be the opposite. You should choose your son and be like, I don't care if you're my God. I don't care if you created me. You don't have the right to tell me to kill my son.
The interesting thing is, when I first heard that story, I wasn't even thinking of it from Abraham's perspective. I was thinking of it from his son's perspective. And I think I was about 6 years old when I first heard that story. And all I could, so roughly the same age his son was supposed to be. And all I could think of was just imagining your own father, the one man on this earth who should do anything to protect you, who should give his life to ensure that you live. And I just tried to imagine that man dragging you to a stone, raising a knife. And I mean, how fucked up would that make you?
Yeah, actually, from the son's perspective, the biblical and Quranic versions are a little bit different, because in the Bible, the son didn't exactly know. You know, he was like, "Where are you taking me?" And he was like, "We're going hunting." And then, you know, he was like, "Oh, that's weird. We don't have any equipment. We don't have any. Where's the food? Like, what's going on?" But in the Quran version, like, his son knew, and he was like, you know, laying back. "Oh, if God told you to kill me, all right then." And he just gave himself up for the sacrifice. So he had a little bit of a different attitude in the two versions.
Well, if you actually look up the different versions between like the biblical versions of stories and Quranic versions, it's actually quite fascinating in a way. I mean, I always feel that the biblical portrayal of characters is actually more human than Quranic characters. I mean, if you look at the Bible, just the story we're talking about now with Abraham sacrificing his son, like in the Bible, when he told Sarah, his wife, "Oh, hey, I've been hearing voices. I think it's God, and it's telling me to murder our child. You cool with that?" And in the Quran, she's like, "Well, you have a penis. Go for it." But in the Bible, she's like, "Are you fucking insane? You're hearing voices telling you to murder our son." And she actually like guards his tent in the night, you know, to actually like keep him from this madman. And that is a theme all throughout the Quran. It's like prophets have to be perfect. And I was actually talking to a Muslim a while ago who insisted that prophets in Islam are not perfect. And I'm just like, yeah, but they're not perfect in the same way that Batman or Captain America isn't perfect. They may make a mistake, but we all know by the end of the story, all wrongs will be righted, all tears will be dried, and they'll come out shinier than ever. I mean, this is like, I mean, just sticking with Sarah there, you know, in the Bible, you have a very human response to that. You're hearing voices telling you to murder our son. What the fuck is wrong with you? And yet in the Quran, well, you have a penis, go for it. But this is throughout all of it. I mean, if you look at Prophet David, you know, in the Quran, is a very righteous man. He's perfect. He has no flaws, and he does his deed. He does the thing that makes him famous, and then the Quran just stops right there. That is the end of the tale. Whereas in the Bible, it actually goes on and shows how he gets into politics and how he lusts after another man's wife and how power corrupts. And you have Prophet Joseph. You know, in the Bible, he's a very flawed character. Yet in the Quran, oh, he's so righteous, and his master's wife is so hot, and she's got such massive tits, and she wants to take me to bed, but I don't do it because I'm a good slave. And it's like, it's
Oh yeah,
it's
you're
this
talking
idea
about
of
the stories.
perfection. But you know what I'm
I
on
just
about?
read that
I don't
one
know if you've
recently.
I don't know if you've actually read the Bible, but you know the difference with just the difference in characters and how in one way they're portrayed in very human ways, and yet in the other, you know, they're just like human beings do not act that way.
Do you know Jephthah in the Bible?
Which one's that?
In the Bible, they have this character Jephthah or something like this, and he's in this battle, and he says, "God, can you help me?" And he says, "Yeah, okay, I'll help you, but you need to sacrifice to me the first thing that comes out of the house when you come home." And this God, knowing full well, I mean, God knows everything, so he helps this Jephthah guy to win the battle. And then Jephthah comes home, and the first thing that comes out of this house is his daughter, and he sacrifices his daughter. So this is what the Christian God does.
I've never heard that. That's tragic. No, I haven't actually read the Bible. I just read some stories from it, and when I compare the Quranic ones to the biblical ones, sometimes.
I think one of the interesting things is that when you read the Quran, like pretty much everything in the Quran is to do with serving Allah. Everything revolves around this deity in the sky. Whereas in the Bible, there are actually very beautiful verses that have nothing to do with God, that are all about humanity. I mean, if you look at Songs of Innocence or It also called the Song of Songs, known as the Song of Solomon, and it's about forbidden love. It talks about meeting each other in hidden places under the stairs. Talks about having sex in fields secretly. It talks about how this one woman, she wakes up and she's sick of it, and she's going out into the streets, and the guards are actually hysterical. And then she goes to a tavern, and then she talks about, you know, just stay me without flagons, for I am sick of love. And then, and that's in the Old Testament. And then you got verses in the New Testament, which just sort of rant against the finality of existence and how everything is meaningless. And it's these passages, and I always found that, interestingly enough, when I was growing up, I always found the passages that had nothing to do with God and everything to do with humanity. I found that way more interesting than I did the ones about divinity.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds interesting. I mean, the Bible is pretty diverse because it has like a bunch of different types of, you know, books and verses and stuff, whereas the Quran is just very uniform. It has one format, and it's just like verses and nonsense.
One of the things that kind of gets me with Muslims is the need for tasbihs, right? Because I mean, I was when I first read the Quran, I was from more of a sort of culturally Christian background, so I was familiar with the Bible. And the first time I read the Quran, it was very apparent to me, and it's still apparent to me now, that the authors of the Quran expect the reader to be familiar with Judeo-Christian law. You know, I mean, you read the Quran and it's full of half statements and do you not remember when, and did we not do? And I'm looking and I'm reading this and I'm like, yep, that's in Exodus, yep, Genesis 2. And it's like, if I didn't know the Bible, I'd have no fucking clue what the Quran is talking about.
Yeah, you know, the funny thing about tafsir is that, like, the whole time I was an actual devout Muslim, I had never consulted tafsir in my life. Like, I was like, the Quran, like, that's fine, and I read it and it was good enough for me. But as soon as I like was starting to become an ex-Muslim, and that was the time that I actually consulted tafsir, and I was like, this is not a good enough excuse. This actually doesn't explain anything. If anything, it makes it sound worse. So it's funny because it's like, oh, as a Muslim, you're supposed to read this and then read the tafsir. I think if I had done that, I would have left earlier, because they give you an explanation that's not as good as what I would have, my childish mind would have been able to come up with. I mean, you know, when I was a kid and I read that, those who your right hands possess, I didn't know what that was supposed to mean. So I was like, oh, I guess, you know, and then I just came up with my own idea. I never asked anyone what it meant. Then later, grow up and find out what it actually means. And it's like, oh, thank you, tafsir, for telling me how barbaric this is.
Yeah, but the Quran, like, there's so much in the Quran that it doesn't actually give you any reason why you're supposed to do this. I mean, you ask a Muslim, okay, why do you have to cut off the foreskin? And they're just going to be like, because God wants you to. Okay, well, whereabouts in the Quran or the hadiths is this? And they just look at you blankly because it's not anywhere there. You know, they don't even know why you're supposed to do it. They've just been told that you do.
Yeah, I don't know either. And if you ask a Muslim guy, because I used to, even when I was Muslim, I used to have this little test to see how open-minded a Muslim guy was, you know, because they wanted to like marry me and stuff. So I'd be like, you know, hey, how do you feel about circumcision? They feel very strongly about it, but you know, they can't explain why, and they don't have good reasons for it.
Well, again, I think this comes back to what I was saying about how the writers of the Quran expect you to be familiar with Judeo-Christianity. You know, I think it's in chapter 2, Surah Al-Cow, and it actually talks about the covenant, and it doesn't necessarily say anything about it. It just briefly mentions, you know, do you remember the covenant? And I was kind of wondering to myself, is that it there? Is that the circumcision thing? Is it referring to the covenant that was made with God, where they sacrificed their foreskins to ward off his displeasure?
I don't know. I feel like I would want to look into that, but
this is like I'm saying. I mean, the very first time, if you, I would actually, I'll promise you this. I will go so far as to promise you this. If you actually look into the Bible, and then you actually go back to the Quran after looking at the Bible, I promise you, the Quran will make more sense. because you will actually know what it's talking about, what it says. Did we not say, and do you not remember? You can be like,
no,
oh
yeah, I know what you mean, because they'll say, oh, you know, this story of this guy, and they may or may not even mention the name, but they're describing the story, and it's like, oh yeah, that does sound familiar. That's the story of this guy, and you have to go consult it. But I hadn't read the Bible originally because I was discouraged to read it, obviously, yeah, when I was younger. But
a lot of it is
but I'm sure that
boring.
it's like kind of copy pasted. Well, the Quran is boring too. But
Does anybody have a, there's a question here. Does anybody have an opinion on jizya and dhimmitude?
an opinion on what?
Jizya and dhimmitude. In other words, being a dhimmi and paying the jizya. Jesus' foreskin is the ring of Saturn. Somebody asked the question, what did they do with Jesus' foreskin? That's exactly what it says. It's the rings of Saturn. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
No, it's fine. That's just funny. It's just okay. I don't really. What's the topic right now?
Jizya and dhimmi. You know what a dhimmi is?
No, I don't. I know what jizya is.
Okay. Do you know what the jizya is?
Yeah.
Okay, what would you call the jizya?
Well, it's a tax, isn't it?
Why would it be a tax?
A mob-style protection racket.
Exactly. That's why it's not a
There
tax.
we go. Yeah, they call it a tax. I'm so used to.
Yeah, I know. But
So the mafia calls it a tax as well.
Have I read Ibn Kathir's tafsir? Yes, of course. So anyway, just to explain this, if you are in a Sharia-controlled area, in other words, if you are in a perfectly controlled caliphate or something, and
you know what it sounds like? I'm sorry. It's like when a prostitute has a pimp, and she pays him to protect her. So he's a pimp. Sorry.
That's exactly it. So if you are a non-Muslim and you are living in an area which is a Sharia-controlled area, you are allowed to stay in that area under certain circumstances. Now, there's different things. It depends how you are being classified and how you behave. So there's under certain conditions you are allowed to stay there, but you need to pay your protection money to the Muslims. And there are certain conditions as a dhimmi. This is why you have this dhimmitude. You do not have human rights as a dhimmi. You will be protected by the Muslims. You will be allowed to live, but you're not allowed to, for example, have a different faith and openly propagate it. You're not allowed to pray in public. You're not allowed to distribute whatever doctrine that you have. Like normally they make the example with the Bible. And then what they normally do is they pull out I think it was it 21 point, I've forgotten, list, which is the list of Omar, which was dictated to the Christians, where they agree that they will not renovate their churches. If they do build new ones, then they will not build them higher than this. If a Muslim approaches them, they will go to one side. They are not allowed to wear better clothes or drive better camels or whatever it is than the Muslims. So there's a whole lot of restrictions that you have to fulfill so that you can live in a Muslim controlled area. This is called being a dhimmi. And one thing that you need to do is you need to pay this this extortion money, which is called the jizya. And this is not something that is prescribed. It's not just a 2.5% or whatever that you pay as a Muslim in the form of zakat, but it can be a lot higher. So that's jizya and dhimmitude. Anybody have any other?
Well, it's basically dick sucking.
It just reminds me of like.
So it's basically dick sucking. This is it. It's like a society where it's in a mental state of a blowjob. You know, I mean, it kind of reminds me of it's always been sort of paramount to me where how Muslims treat non-Muslims in a Muslim society. It's almost like they want to be Allah. I mean, if you think of how Islam establishes prayer, it's very much like a blowjob for Allah. It really is. 5 times a day, you're on your knees. It's like, oh, Allah, you're so great. There's no one else like you. Oh, you're the best. Oh, you're the best. And it really is like that. And then like you actually get someone under you, under the Muslim, and it's like the exact same thing. It's like, no. Your temple can't be bigger than my temple. You know what? Oh no, you have to cast your eyes down. And again, it's has anyone else ever had that impression?
No, that's what it is.
I completely forgot what I was gonna say because he started on with that.
You're a dizzy blonde, admit it.
Oh my gosh. Oh my
Never
gosh,
quite thought of it in that way. There you go.
Thoughts on Muslims?
But no,
another way
sorry,
to
this is
look
what I
at
was
it.
gonna say.
Muslims Spain.
This is one of the ways, this is one of the methods that they're using to try to start implementing this, you know, Islam will dominate the world, and that's one of the ways to do it is depress the minority religions in the land. I mean, yeah, oppress them so that they feel like, oh, it's just easier for me to convert, you know, so I don't have to go through all this. And then it's like by force. No, they'll say it's not by force. Like, you know, that they did it from their own free will. Like, you know, they had a choice. Yeah, some choice. So there's countless prophecies that Muhammad made, like, you know, to almost towards the end of time before the day of judgment. There's going to be a stretch of time where the entire world will be dominated by Muslims. That will be the only religion. There will be 40 years where there won't exist a single non-Muslim on the world. Everyone will be Muslim, and those types of hadiths and prophecies and ideas are what give us these people today who keep saying like Islam is, you know, the most fastest growing, and one day Islam will dominate the world, like mark my words, and all this stuff, because that's what they believe.
But
And
the thing about these doomsday prophecies, right? I mean, there's some where you can just ascribe another meaning to it. It's like, you know, the end will not come until the Muslims fight Rome. Well, the Roman Empire is now gone, so I don't think it's ever going to come back. Oh no, it actually means the West or Europe. Okay, well, what was the name of that? I can't. Maybe Stubbs will remember, but you know, there's a particular tribe who existed in Muhammad's time, and now they're extinct. And it actually says that the end will not come until the buttocks of until the naked buttocks of the tribe of the women of this tribe jiggle as they go around something. I can't really remember, but it's one of like the main prophecies. The end will not come until this happens. Well, that tribe is extinct, so. Is Judgment Day been starved off forever?
Well, maybe the DNA is still around.
You took the words out of my mouth. The descendants of the people from that tribe, you know, will somehow, in a way, and they'll be like, oh, you know, maybe it happened already. Maybe the prophecy happened and you don't even know it, because that's something that Muslims say sometimes. They'll say maybe the Dajjal prophecy already happened and we just don't know. I've heard it. There's some people who believe that.
I had a conversation with someone about the magic wall holding back Gog and Magog, and you know that prophecy about there's these supernatural people and they're behind a magic wall and they tear it down every day, and every night it magically rebuilds itself, and they'll come to a lake and they'll drink the entire thing. And I just says to someone, okay, well, we've got satellites, we've got satellites orbiting the entire Earth. We know that. I mean, if you think of all the things that are man-made that we can actually see from orbit, and then you have to imagine like a magical wall magically repairing itself every day, holding back a tribe of supernatural. I don't even know what to describe them as. Okay, where is it? And I've been hearing lately Muslims are now starting to claim that this magical wall is hidden underground.
Well, that's the only place they have to. I mean, what else can you do? Of course they do. This is so pathetic. And I just realized that I forgot to go into the crazy hadith, because the reason why we had this thing on hadith today was with Satan living in your nose and peeing in your ear and all the crazy hadiths that you get, and the fly that you need to. I forgot completely to go into that area of the hadiths, the crazy ones. Anybody want to quickly run down a collection? Shall we go and do some brainstorming on this?
Go for it if
Well,
you've got a couple.
Well, let's have a competition. What is the craziest hadith of them all?
You guys know better than me. Go for
I
it.
think pretty much anything that has to do with the jinn is just off the wall. I know one that says if you go in the bathroom, you know, you shouldn't pee standing up because you might accidentally pee on a jinn, and then he'll get mad and, you know, try to get revenge on you. That's why Muslim men are not allowed to pee standing up. They got to sit down like everyone else, like women.
Okay, for me, the craziest one is definitely one where the guy goes to Muhammad in the morning and says, "Listen, I accidentally drank your pecan," and Muhammad said, "Well, it can only heal you. Just enjoy while it lasts. Cheers."
Oh my God, that's disgusting. It can only heal you.
Well, that's not even crazy though. That's just disgusting. I mean, if we think of actual crazy, I wouldn't know where to begin.
Well, what about the walking stone, which was stealing Moses' clothes?
Well, there is that one where like a
Moses'
Muslim
stone?
will walk past like a tree or a boulder, and it will come to life and say, "Oh, Muslim, there is a Jew behind me. Come kill him."
Yeah. Now, there's one which says that Moses was not bathing naked with the others, and so they said, well, maybe he's got this growth on his scrotum, so they got a stone to run away with his clothes so that they could see Moses naked and see that he does not have any growth on his scrotum.
It must have been in really good shape for a man almost 1,000
Yeah.
years
I
old.
remember that.
And hitting a corpse
were
with a
like-
piece of the cow to make it talk and
No, that's not
that is-
hadith, that's Quran.
Raven, hitting the corpse with a piece of the cow to revive it is not a hadith, it's actually in the Quran. This is what I wanted to say. Oh, goodness. Or what about the hadith where Muhammad gets into the grave of his aunt and sleeps with her when she's dead?
No. Oh, what? I haven't heard this. Actually, you know what? When you say like the craziest hadiths, I think that the determining factor is something that even a Muslim will hear and go, okay, like that sounds a little ridiculous. We have to check the validity of that. Because all the ones that have to do with like, trees talking and stones running away, they're like, oh, well, that's obvious. That's a miracle. But if it's something,
If you go to bed and you have angels opening your chest and washing your heart with the water of Zamzam, with dirty water, putting it back and then filling your heart with wisdom and knowledge, and then they put you back together and they put you on a flying donkey. I mean, come on. This is the basis of Islam. You cannot have Islam without that story.
it's metaphorical.
Crazy. That's totally crazy. And every single Muslim needs to somehow, somewhere, acknowledge, yes, that is what is happening, or that's what happened. I mean, even Mehdi Hassan, Hassan, was it? Yeah, I think it was Mehdi Hassan, was asked by Professor Dawkins, on Al Jazeera, on public national TV, do you, and I'll give you credit that you don't, teach your children that Muhammad was sitting on the flying donkey? And he said, yes, I do. And he said, well, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I remember seeing
Yeah, I
that.
remember that.
Yeah.
He said that, yeah, I do believe miracles are real. Like miracles of Allah happened. Like, he was like, yes, I do believe this.
Well, the day when the heads of the people are turned to their back, or when the faces are contorted, or when you go into apes and pigs and things like, come on, there are so many crazy things. And this is the Quran. And then you go into the hadiths, which are even worse. Yeah.
When it comes to ones that Muslims might actually stop at, I actually thought the whole green skin abuse victim might actually stop some of them, or they're like the whole boil ones, and they're like, no, a lot of them are actually quite proud of that, and I'm just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
What
about Muhammad sucking a child? Oh, sorry. What about Muhammad sucking a child's tongue by you? What, mate?
Wasn't there one about him sucking a child's dick as well?
No, that's the Jews.
What was when Muhammad did that?
Did Muhammad die with an erection? Well, why would he die with an erection? Okay, I do not know.
Well, according to theology, Muhammad died with his face buried in a teenage girl's tits. I don't know about anyone else, but that's how I want to go out.
That's a comforting thought, yes. I must admit, I had this the other day at the dentist, and it was very comforting. Okay, real things. He, the prophet, lifted up Al-Hassan's shirt and kissed the little penis. There you go. And it's
that sounds right.
Okay, I think if that is an authentic Al-Bukhari, I've never seen this hadith, and I will give this the award for the craziest one today. That's for sure.
Oh, Lilith, I have a quick question, just in regards to the disgusting hadiths I mentioned. When you were growing up, did you ever come across the one that said if a man was covered in boils and he had pus running all down his body, and a woman licked it all up, literally licked him clean, but she still wouldn't have fulfilled her obligations to him as a wife?
Yep.
I was wondering if Lilith came across that. Like, is this something you were taught at school?
I never heard that one.
Oh, what about the one with the abuse victim? There's a woman, I can't remember who she's married to, but she's beaten by her husband so bad her skin is green, and like she goes to Muhammad and she's like, well, look at me, my skin's fucking green, I'm a walking bruise. And also my husband is impotent, and her husband comes along with 2 sons, and he's like, no, she's talking bollocks, I can get it up. And Muhammad looks at his sons and he's like, by Allah, they resemble him as a crow resembles a crow. Then he looks back at the abuse victim, who's like a walking bruise, and he's like, I'm actually in love with someone else, I want to marry him, he doesn't hit me. Okay, but you've got to spread your legs for your abuser again. What? No. The man that's done that to you, you've got to spread your legs again, and then you can divorce him and marry the one that doesn't abuse you.
Yeah, I remember that one, but I heard it after I left Islam, though. They keep those ones hidden away from the little kids.
Was all these hidden? I mean, like when it comes to the Ridda Wars, the wars of apostasy, is that
the only way for Muslims to find out some of these questionable things is if they go and like look it up themselves. I remember when I was little, I was like maybe 12, 13, something like that, and we had just a big, Sahih Bukhari like book of hadith, and like I grabbed it and I just flipped through it and I would like read stuff, and that was the only way I was going to come across these things, because they're not spoken about because they don't want to acknowledge that's what the prophet did. So I remember it's kind of funny how the cognitive dissonance, like when I think about it now, like I read it and I accepted that it was hadith, but I was like, nah, I don't agree with that. And then I just went on with my life. I was like, I'm not going to do that. It was the one that says a woman, like a wife, a woman can only grieve more than 3 days for her husband, no other human. Like, so if my mom dies, I can't grieve more than 3 days for my mom or dad or anyone, like only for my husband. And then I'm allowed to grieve for like 5 months and it's fine.
Yeah, and also you're not allowed to actually go to a burial, because like men can go to a funeral and things like that, but women wail like children. It's distracting and it's not good, so they aren't allowed.
Oh, I don't remember that. I'm also not allowed to pick up the Quran. I'm not even allowed to touch it and read it once a month because I'm so dirty. I'm filthy.
Yeah, there's a lot of those. Oh goodness. But then
that's
you can get clean
interesting
as a man if you've eaten, because you can have your fingers licked clean by somebody else. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, because that's so clean. Like, and even if I take a shower, like I'm still dirty. But you can make wudu with sand if you don't have water, but you're more clean than a woman who is once a month.
It is interesting how the 3 Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the absolute paralyzing terror that these religions have menstruation.
Yeah, because I didn't understand.
Yeah, because it's like I said earlier, they attribute like women, and they associate them with like impurity, and there's like Muhammad really sounded like he had OCD, because he was obsessed with cleanliness and like washing this 3 times and washing this 3 times and doing also and being like obsessed, and you have to like literally wash certain things 5 times a day. and then you go and do it over again. And he was like obsessed with number 3, and then you go and do dhikr, and you chant these words 3 times each, and
Or
you
like
do it
you know,
33
a
times.
fly lands in your cup, you know, dip it in again because one wing has a cure. And yeah, I mean,
I don't know how he
just
rationalized that in his
just a
head. That's
2-second look at
nasty.
Islam shows Muhammad as to be a very OCD character.
I'm gonna say something funny. When I went to Morocco, it was like probably one of the first days I was in Morocco, and we were in an outside restaurant, eating tagine, and there was like cups of Coca-Cola, and there was a big fat fly. Oh my God, I can't talk. Fruit fly came and like landed in somebody's cup of Coca-Cola, and I was like, "That's disgusting. You better not drink that." And then like his friend was like, "Oh man, you know, if my grandma was here, she would say just take it out and throw it away and drink the rest. Like don't waste food." And I was like, that reminded me of the hadith about the fly. Like, oh, you dip the fly in, but then you still drink it because it's good for you.
Well, did you know a couple of years ago that Saudi scientists, quote unquote scientists, actually claimed that they found a cure for cancer using camel piss?
Yeah.
No.
They put them on petri dishes. They did the same thing with honey. They did the same thing with Zamzam water, and then they showed that every one of those is actually good for you because they showed some petri dishes where bacteria were killed. Yeah.
You know, the interesting thing, just Lilith, what you were talking about how Muslims don't want to acknowledge certain things. When I found out that last week's show was going to be on geopolitics and Islam, I sent Rob an article. It's actually, I think, like 10 years old now, but it was about how Islamic nations are trying to strong arm the UN into passing blasphemy laws. And I thought the interesting thing about that is how nothing has changed. You know, if you go back to the beginning, and they were doing that, and you do it, and then it's like 10 years ago, and now with like flagging the videos, and you know, this absolute desperation for only the right kind of speech about Islam is to be allowed. And in a way, it's actually kind of fascinating, you know, how it's completely unchanged, and how so much of the geopolitics of the Islamic world just boil down to that one thing first and foremost.
Okay, is that it? Do we have any more? The question on Muhammad's sex addiction, I'm not going to address because yeah, he was crazy.
Let's
about
call
this.
it.
He was it. I'm not. But there's no point making this into a topic. I don't think.
I actually do have a question. Just going by the theology alone, does anyone but me think that Aisha saw through Muhammad?
Well, according to the hadith, absolutely, because she said, I mean, how come that every time that you are asking for something, God comes up with an appropriate saying in the Quran?
But not just that, how she was suspicious of him, how she followed him, things like that. I mean, I've always got the impression that Aisha was just sort of standing there with these prophet claims, and she was like, yeah, right.
Yeah. It's funny. I think that if anyone goes and specifically looks up, reads the hadiths that were narrated by Aisha, they'll find kind of a pattern. And surely, like, she had some that probably got censored and stifled and lost in history or whatever. But you'll see, like, her attitude and the way she talked. I agree. She seemed like she was like trying to slip in hidden messages. Like she didn't really believe this nonsense.
All right, guys, let's bring it to a close. I don't know if anybody's got a hadith of the week. If not,
I don't know. We've talked about a lot of hadiths.
Yes, we have. Maybe Stops can just wrestle one up there.
Yeah, that's very quick.
I'd be interested in the one about Muhammad sucking on a little boy's dick.
I don't have that because I only use Bukhari and Muslim, and I don't think he's in there. I just need to fast forward to the ones we haven't had yet. These we've had. This we've had. This we've had. There we go. Abdurrahman bin Aswad narrated from his father that he heard Abdullah say, "The Prophet wanted to defecate, and he told me to bring him 3 stones. I found 2 stones and looked for a third, but I could not find any. So I picked up a piece of dung and brought them to the Prophet. He took the 2 stones and threw away the dung and said, "This is Riks." Abdul Rahman said, "Riks is the food of the jinn."
There we go.
Yep. That's nasty.
I want to thank our panelists, Stops in particular, for sharing a whirlwind tour through Islam to begin with. Lily for joining us and welcoming back Raven. I want to thank all of our viewers and those who contributed in the chat. And we will be back next Friday at 8 p.m. UK time.
We're not doing an after show?
See you then.
We're doing an after show.
Bye.
So no after show?
Do you guys want to do something?
I don't know. I just thought you wanted to hear my tale of woe.